Hello, my name is Milvad, and today we are going to work with the properties that exist in the Eloquent model. Okay, first I show the uh, source of the uh, property in the model. If you want to learn more, you can refer to it. Okay, in generate model class, down no, here is a table names, and I add this link in description. You can learn more about the properties, but today we are working, for example, with table, with primary keys and another. Okay, here I open the project in PHP store. In models, I can open product, is not problem. Here is the properties model. Okay, first is the table. Table is that the here with table properties you can determine the table name in the database. For example, in here, for example, we have a products table. Laravel automatically find the migration related migration, but if you want to determine the table name, you can add name here. For example, you have a product model, but the migration name is for example productive, for example, is the implicit name. Here you can determine the table name. For example, here is a products, and but Laravel automatically find the migration, and it's not need always to determine here. You can if the table name is a different name with model name, you can determine here. Okay. The second property is a primary keys. For example, you have a primary key in the migration is not ID. The default primary key of Laravel is the ID, but for example, you have a primary, for example, Milvad ID, and is a primary key that's in the table, and default of Eloquent model is primary key is the ID column here, but you can here you can change it primary key here with primary key, and here for example I add Milvad dev, and it's changed to change primary key from ID to Milvad ID. Okay, for next property is the incrementing. I think is incrementing, yes, and it's a boolean. You can add default is true, and you can change it to false. I can add a comment, is very helpful. Determine the table name. Here is a determine primary key that exists in the table. Here is a incrementing. If you wish to use a non-incrementing or a non-numeric primary key, you must define a incrementing property. For example, primary key is the string, for example, and it's not incrementing. And for example, you have a string, for example, name, but is the string is not a number. You can use this. For this, you can turn off the incrementing of primary key. I think it's a good comment for this. Okay. For example, I say here, if the, for example, primary key is a string and it's not incrementing, you can use this property. But the next property is a key type. Key type is determine the primary key is, for example, is a string, is boolean, for example, and if is not integer, you can use key type for say my primary key is not integer. Say my primary key type, or you can say primary key type. Here, for example, I use a string. It's also like in the document if you learn. For next property is a time stamps. Yes. Here Laravel have a default column is the created at and updated at, and is a timestamp. Here we have a created at and updated at. But if you want to, for example, remove this from the table, you are use timestamp to say I don't use for example created at and updated at, and it's a boolean value, true or false. The default is a true, but and you can use false here. Okay, for comment I think is the would say use time stamps, plural. Yes. The next property is date format. I think is very clear from the name. Date format is that they customize the format of the model's timestamp. For example, you want to say YMD is a year, a month, and day. If you want to customize this, you can use date format. Customize timestamp format. I say before Laravel also have a timestamp, is that the column is the created at and updated at. If you want to customize the name of these columns, you can use the constants of this created at and is updated at. Here, for example, say Milvad created and Milvad updated, and is the name of the column of created at. The next property is the very important properties, and is the connection. I think it's clear from the name. Connection is that the connection for database. For example, you want to use for example, you use Postgres and MySQL database, and for example, you want to say this model use the Postgres. You can say here is a SQL server, is a SQLite, is a MySQL. Default is a MySQL, and is a Postgres SQL, and it's determine the database connection, and it's very helpful properties. Okay, for next method, next property, we can use this user model. User model here we have a label. Label is very we can say I can say label is the security section, because you want to, for example, here I can say here I want to say a product. For example, I want to store a new product. We can say the column of the products that I want to save it. For example, I want to say save title and category ID. I don't want to save price, and you can determine the columns. For example, title and price and category ID. And if you use label, you must determine the columns that you want to save. If, for example, remove price, and when you want to store a new product, price did not have any value, and it's a very important tip that you are working on a project. And is that a label here is determine the columns that want to store. Okay, the next property is a hidden. Hidden is that you can determine the columns, for example, password, remember token, and or we can in product is, for example, price. Hidden is a price. Here the price that hidden from the query. When you are, for example, get all the product, the product did not show didn't show the price in the query, and if you want to hidden the important columns, you can use the hidden here. And for comments, you can say here hidden columns in query. Casts. Cast is the one of the most important properties in the Laravel. Cast is that for example, you have a price that the type is the string, but you want to show the price as an integer in the query. For example, you can write here price as a integer, for example, your integer, or collection, float, or decimal, and a lot of type is cast the columns as type of columns. Columns, yes, it's not wrong. And here maybe you see the guarded here, and it's very interesting. Guarded is work like a label. Labels say you must to determine the columns that you want to store. If you want to did not determine the columns and it's not very important, you say any for example columns can for example any columns can take a value and it's not matter. And for example you have 50 columns and you didn't want to determine the columns in the, for example, flavor. It's very boring. You can use the guarded. And here for comment, any columns can take a value and it doesn't matter. For run, yes. Okay, and the next property is very helpful, that help to, for example, help to n+1 problems. Is that the here is that help to with and with count method. Its name is the with, and you can determine the relation that you want to add it in all query for products. For example, I have a category, and here in, for example, web.php, here if you want to, for example, get product first and fresh, wait for oh, because I commented these properties. Here we have a relation. Here is the category. I don't use with here, but when you use with for each queries that's related to product, added category in relation. But for example, in one query you don't need to with or with relation. You can use without, and for example category, refresh, and category is removed from the relations. Is that the tip for queries? And also we have a with count property, and it's also like a with count method, is very helpful. Okay, for last properties, I commented this. It's not need to add comment. For example, you have a attribute product function, or is the public function, is that the, for example, is active, and it's the attribute, yes, return new attributes. I record a video for attributes in future. For example, active, it's a implicit value, and if you want to append this value or this attribute to queries, you can use the appends, and it's the name is active. And for example, in result, we have a appends here is active, and you can use this, and it's okay. is the last properties. I removed this for next video. Yes. Okay, I hope this video is very helpful for you. If you like this video, like the video and subscribe my channel. Until next video, goodbye.